Okay, the class is about to start. So let's get with the preliminaries out of the question. My name is Paledan, Safemal, Paledan, whichever way you want to pronounce it. I will be running this class, which is scheduled to last for about an hour and should include a small practical at the end. Usual things apply. Please make sure your mumble is set up to push to talk to avoid background noise. Ask any questions in this E-UNI class.E-UNI channel and any other chat to any channel you want to. Don't use the mumble unless I ask you to, which will happen after the question and answer part of the class. Also, do feel free to ask or mention if there's any problem with my mic racks and you have trouble understanding. I'd much rather have you tell me that you can understand than being politely bored and not understanding. First question by Trace Morlin. It's better if you are in Aldred, and yes, the practical will take place around Aldred. Your fit is relevant. It helps because of tracking disruption. If you can either fly a Namar frigate, which would be the Crucifier in this case, and I will supply some if you don't have any, or a ship that has turrets, which would be guns. So, first of all, tracking disruption is a part of E-War, so we'll have a short reminder about what E-War is. E-War is a marvelous force multiplier, and tracking disruption is the Amar form of E-War. There are 4 E-War forms. The first one is offensive, which is the Minmatar form, which is target painting, and it makes the target look bigger, meaning it will get more damage from whichever guns or missiles you're firing at. The other 3 are defensive, which means they will prevent your side from taking damage. Doesn't mean that you're not attacking the enemy fleets, just that your own ships are not taking any damage, or are taking less damage. First is, and most hated, is Caldera, which is ECM, and is the most effective form of E-War when it works. What it does is it prevents you from locking up anything, any target, so you cannot apply any module. You can have drone damage if your drones are out and already at work or assisting another player, but that's about it. The one drawback of Caldera ECM is that it's random. Well, it's based, the probability that it will work is based on your jamming strength, which depends on your ships and skills, and on your target. The Galente form of E-War is target sensor dampening, which means you will find it harder to lock, and you will lock at closer ranges. If you want to experience what the Galente form of E-War is, just run a mission using a normal ship, and then go back to the same mission after fitting a warp's core stabilizer on your ship, and you will find that you can only lock at half the range, and it takes forever for the targets to lock, meaning that frigates rushing you will get in range before you get time to blab them out. Now, the tracking disruption, which is the Amar form of E-War, will make it harder for other ships to target you and to hit you. The advantages compared to other forms of E-War are, first of all, there is no best form of E-War, but the Amar version is better in that than some of them, in that it always works. That is what it helps against compared to Caldera. And there is no duration, as in, for instance, the Galente form of E-War will only work for a while, but once you've got the target locked, then there is the sensor dampening no longer has an effect on you. Whereas tracking disruption will still affect you as long as you've got the modules turned on. The drawbacks are it only works on ships with turrets, and we'll go back to that later, whereas all other forms of E-War apply to all ships. Now, if we want to look at what it does, Tech 1 module will reduce your optimal range and fall off by 18%, and it will reduce your tracking speed by 18%. Other modules will, other modules will be slightly more effective, about twice as effective once you have a script loaded, and I will get back to this later. So essentially, what it means is when you are targeted by an Amar tracking disruptor, you can still shoot, you can still target ships, but you will usually miss. Now, Fatolado link tracking disruptor 1, for which I'm grateful. So everybody please click on this and get the show info. Then go to the variation tab and hit the compare button that's at the end. Once you do this, you can click, there are little boxes that you can tick to sort them out, and you should tick the metal level 1. Then, once you've sorted them by metal level, you can tick accuracy fall-off, optimal range, which should be the same, and there is a tracking speed bonus. So, what this shows is the tracking speed bonus is the effect that the tracking disruptor will have in tracking speed. And I'm sorry, I forgot something. Yes, you should also click the optimal range bonus. So, a tracking disruptor 1 with no scripts will hit the target's optimal range and fall off by 17%, which means you will only be able to hit at a 17% less range, and you will have a 17% malus to your tracking speed, meaning you will miss more often. The best Tech 1 tracking disruptor is the Balmer series, which is a bit harder to fit but has the best bonuses. It's the same as a tracking disruptor 2, except it's easier to fit. It also has more range. Napoleon Red asked, what does script mean? And I'm getting into that. So a script is a sort of ammunition that you can use to load in your tracking disruptor, and it will give you a bonus to whatever you're doing. The only problem with a script is that you will have either a tracking script or an optimal range script. To give you an example, if you take the tracking disruptor 1, without script, you will decrease your target's optimal range by 18%, and its tracking speed will be degraded by another 18%. Whereas, if you give it an optimal range script, you will not target its tracking speed at all, but you will decrease its optimal range by 36%, well, 35.8 to be precise. If you use a tracking script, it's just the other way around, in that you will not have any effect on its optimal range, but you will degrade its tracking speed by 36%. And thanks to Mia Sedgwick for linking them. Compared to ammunition, scripts do not get used, and they can be switched very quickly. Now, regarding the ships. The ships, any ship can use a tracking disruptor. You can fit them it's a mid-slot module, as you saw. But some ships are better at it than others, and I will focus on the specialized ships. The first ship is and they're all MR. So the first ship is the MR Crucifier frigate. There are two very good fits on the E-UNI Wiki forum. You've got a beginner fit, and you've got an advanced fit, which is very good, and has as much as 106 kilometer optimals if you've got the right skills. And I will link here is a fit that I built a while ago that is generally on the cheap side, but that still allows me to be particularly irritating up to 80 or so kilometers, given that I have more frigates to 5. But as you see, these are cheap Tech 1 modules and no rigs. I should probably add some rigs on this. I didn't save my best Crucifier fit, but the one on the E-UNI Wiki is pretty good. The Crucifier is a Tech 1 frigate. It takes about 2 hours to train into. If you want to do a tracking disruptor and you still have the link, you can see that the requirements are, again, very light. You'll need electronic 3, but that's something you want to train anyway. And it's very effective in that you can tracking disrupt your targets at a very hefty range, starting with about 45 kilometers with minimal skills. The ship bonuses are a percentage to tracking disruptor effectiveness, I'll get to that, and a percentage to the tracking disruptor optimal range. The next ship is the Arbitrator. The Arbitrator is an MR cruiser, and it has bonuses on tracking disruptor strength. It is not an MR cruiser that's supposed to be fighting with guns. Well, you can put guns on it, but it's mostly optimized for drones and tracking disruptor. It's a very good ship that you can use for either PvE or solo PvE PvP, and if I can find it, there we go. Here's a fit that I use on the various Noobs on Patrol fleets that is optimized, so to speak, for E-UNI fleet action. So it's not a good fit for PvE or solo PvP, but I like it for fleet action. As you can see, it's built around drones and it's 3 tracking disruptors. You do need a prop module because this thing handles like a brick. Now, why we've got all the advanced ships that I will not be too detailed on, because this class is mostly for new players, and by the time you get to fly the advanced ships, you will know how they work. But they're the Sentinel, then you've got the Curse, and you've got the Pilgrim, which is the Tech 2 version of the Arbitrator. They're respectively an electronic attack ship, a combat recon ship, and a force recon ship. All of these are can be found on the electronic warfare guide on the E-UNI wiki. Now, as to modules, there's very little you can do. The modules you will need will be the tracking disruptors, which you've seen of which you've seen the list before, and as you can see, they're all Tech 1 modules, and once you can use one, you can use them all. The rigs that you can use are particle dispersion projectors, which will increase the optimal range of all electronic warfare modules, but will hit your shields as part of their drawback. Other possible rigs are tracking diagnostic subroutines, which will increase the tracking speed and the optimal range of tracking disruptor and other modules on your own ship. As you can see, these are the 2 rigs that I fitted on my Arbitrator, and like the previous one, the drawback is that you have less shields for your defense. But as we will see later, that's not much of a drawback, because you should never be in a position where your shields will be a factor. Next, just for the sake of completeness, there are some tracking disrupting drones. These are the Acolyte, Infiltrator, and Praetor for the light, medium, and heavy versions. Frankly speaking, I've never used them. Well, I have tried using them in preparation for this class. I was not particularly impressed. They're not all that fast. They're not all that effective, and all they do is make you the target not as effective as shooting you. I have never seen them in used in fleets, and Googling, I didn't find many mentions of them being used, so generally speaking they are not that effective, but well, they exist. As to the skills that will help will be weapon disruption, which reduces the capacitor needs of your tracking disruptors. But if you're flying a MAR, you will usually want to work on your capacitor skills anyway. Then you have frequency modulation, which will increase your fall-off. Long distance jamming, which will increase your optimals. That will work for other E-war skills. And finally, the specialized one will be turret destabilization, which will boost your tracking disruptor strength. Now, as to this thing about tracking disruptor strength, what does it mean? When you're within optimal range, your tracking disruption will always work at 100%. Once you get below optimal range, this will be like a gun, meaning that when you're at between optimal and fall-off, the effect of your tracking disruption will decline until you're at 50% at fall-off range, and then it will decline even further. Some ships have boosts to their tracking disruptor strength, even starting with the MAR noob ships. So if you're an MAR pilot and you get popped in a fleet and you ship to a noob ship, see if you can find a tracking disruptor or a cheap tracking disruptor, get back to the fight, you can make yourself useful. That and a point would definitely make yourself useful. Do we have any questions so far? It's a very simple topic as far as mechanics are concerned, and then we can get into tactics. Trace Morlin asked, do you need all three of the skills you listed to be effective? The answer is no. You don't need them. You don't need anything. All you need is a tracking disruptor, and this will work. The point of having the skills will make you more effective, but you're already effective as soon as you have one tracking disruptor. In fact, even some tacklers mount tracking disruptor as part of their mid slots just to defend themselves against the people, their targets. Napoleon Red asks, are there any ways to counter the tackles? I think you mean the tracking disruptions, and we'll get to that. To counter the tackle, tracking disruption is not going to help, because what it does is it only works on turrets. So it's not going to work on any other modules. It's not going to work on logistics. It's not going to work on webs, on points, on e-war. It will only degrade ships that are firing guns. This means lasers, hybrids, or projectile weapons. Marathon asks, would I focus all three target disruptors on my arbitrator on a single target, or put them in three different targets? I'll get to that in a minute, and if I don't, please feel free to ask again, because I should have. Okay, now as to tactics. The first thing I want to stress is E-War General, not just the Amar form, is an absolutely fabulous way to fly in fleets when you are a low-skill pilot. The two candidates for low-skill pilots are usually tacklers and E-War ships. Tacklers, when you have a low-skill tackler, all you can do is maintain a point on a target that's already engaged and make sure it doesn't run away, which is fine, which is very useful. But when you have 20 tacklers in a fleet, let's be frank, tacklers number 11 to 20 are not doing very much except making it pointless for the enemy to shoot at our tacklers. Being a good tackler is dangerous, requires a lot of skills, a lot of practice, which doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's a very important role, but it's not really a low-skill action. By contrast, E-War is an extremely cost-effective way to make yourself useful to a fleet. And each race has an E-War frigate which takes exactly the same time as the Crucifier to train into, which is 2 hours and a bit less if you have implants. And each race's E-War modules requires very little training as well, most of which will be electronics or other skills that you will need for whatever you will be doing anyway. In case of a tracking disruptor, that Crucifier I showed you, or even the low skill E-UNI fit, will significantly degrade any of the turret ships from the enemy fleet, and this will already work from 40 kilometers out, even if you're a very, very low skill pilot. So you should get into fleet, and if you do, E-War is a very useful way for you to make a contribution. It also has another advantage, and we'll get to that later, but when we get into real tactics. But it is that since you'll be flying from range, usually it's a bit less stressful than having to dodge incoming fire in tackler, or trying to get in range in a DD ship, and then suddenly your primary, you pop your look for your pod saver tab, and then you're out of the fight. You should be able to stay in the fight a bit longer as an E-War ship. And one of the advantages of of non-Caldera ships is that they are less hated than the Caldera Ecm, which really has the worst hate factor. You should not be primaried quite as fast as if you were flying, say, a Blackbird. These are really hated. So assuming you've got that shiny Crucifier and you're in the fleet, what will you do? You should know which ship types will be useful for the fleet for you. Here are ships that you should never target with tracking disruptions. And I'm not going to give you the entire list, but I'm going to give you the most common types. The first type is all lodges. There are Tech 1 and Tech 2 cruisers that can repair other ships, and they're very often primary targets when you're flying with E-UNI fleets. The idea being that first you shoot up the enemy ability to repair itself, and then you can break whatever is left tank more easily. The most common logi cruisers are the Guardian for armor logi, and the Scimitar and Basilisk for the shield logis. And you have also the Tech 1 equivalents. I'm not going to list all the names because I don't want to overwhelm you with names, but say that if you find a Guardian or a Scimitar or Basilisk, they will often be called primaries, but leave them alone. They don't have guns. Well, they could fit gun, but they usually won't. Another ship that you should never target with tracking disruptors, and that is fairly common, though not on the PvP fleets that you will usually fight as part of a E-UNI fleet, is the Drake. The Drake cannot mount turret, it's entirely missiles, and tracking disruption has no effect on missiles, so leave Drakes alone. Here are other ships, so that's, I told you, Basilisk, Scimitar, Guardian, Drake, and I'm going to run up to 8, so as not to overwhelm you with too many names. Here are other ships that could be tracking disrupted, but will usually be fitted in such a way that it's pointless. The Raven, which again will usually have missiles, will be fired from range. Vexor, Tengu, well, these are missile boats usually, and the Dubinix, which is a very short range ship, and it's often used as a neuting battleship, also using its drones for damage. And tracking disruption will not work for drones unless you want to target one specific drone and tracking disrupt it. Definitely not cost effective. Now, as to, instead of that, which ships should be prime targets for tracking disruption? If you have a range script, and I strongly encourage you to have both scripts on your ship ready to switch for whichever will be the most useful. If you have a range script, you want to go after snipers. Like the Caldera Rock. It's a Caldera battleship that can be fed into a very effective sniper. Other ships like the Tier 3 battle cruisers, the Minmatar Tornado, for instance, very popular with that as a long-range sniper. Or the Maelstrom also can be used as sniper. Generally speaking, whenever you hear about snipers, or when you hear kiters, or that fleet is kiting us, which means it's trying to stay in range and fight from range and out of our site's optimal range, then any names that is associated with sniping or kiting is a good target for you to track and disrupt. For instance, take a rock. I've got a rock that I use for incursions, and it does have a sniper version. When I use it as a sniper, I can shoot targets at about 150 kilometers. Now, if I get a range script, one tracking disruptor will halve that range, so suddenly I can only fire up to 75 kilometers, which means if I'm already at, say, 120, I would have to move 50 kilometers in my rock, which is going to take me forever, because it's a very slow ship. Alternatively, if I get like 2, 3, 4 tracking disruptors, and this is where I'm starting to answer Rose Dravian's question, then my range will be reduced accordingly. Each tracking disruptor that you pile up on a target will have stacking penalties, which mean the first one reduces you by about 50%, the next one will be reducing you by 87% times 50%, and so on. So each one will be slightly less effective, but still when you pile them up, they have a very large effect at the end. And Otto1 Paleolithic asks, how do you get close enough to use tracking disruptor on sniping ship? That's a good question. Usually you can try to burn toward them, because anything they will find burning toward them will make them fly. Also you can capitalize on the fact that you will not always be primary because you're not a very dangerous ship. Finally, a crucifier fit with the right rigs and skills has an optimals at over 100 kilometers, which should allow you to get close enough to most sniping ships. But yes, an absolutely specialist sniper that is hitting from 200 kilometers will require to try to warp to range. Here's a link that I've posted from the EVE Online forums where people are complaining about the effect of mass tracking disruptors from NPC rats on their ships that make it almost impossible for them to target. It also works on the tracking ability of your turrets, which is my next part. No, sorry, I forgot. Last category of ships that you can want to use range disruption scripts on, or even short-range scripts, like the Galente, and some min-metal ships like the Megatron, but all the blaster fit ships, if you halve their range, it means that they will be firing at optimal, say about 20 kilometers, and then you suddenly make it almost impossible for them to hit because they will be at twice their optimals, which means they'd go from 50% to 6% damage in average. Or the alternative would be for them to move back, slowboat back to the battlefield, which makes them more susceptible to your side's damage, and also will take time because they're really slow, like all battleships. So don't forget to spread some love to Megathrons, Hyperions, Hurricanes, that sort of ships. Now, prime target for the tracking disruption scripts, meaning your turrets cannot track accurately. For instance, you have a kiter or a sniper and your fleet's interceptors are burning toward him, and he will of course be trying to hit them. Well, the tracking disruption script on the target will make it harder for him to hit your interceptors or tacklers. He will be able to lock them, fire at them, but he will usually miss. Except if he's a Tengu, of course, in which case he'll be firing missiles and can't do anything about it. Another one would be fast ships orbiting your battleship. If you got fast ships that are using their speed to get under your battleship's guns, well, you can track and disrupt them, and then suddenly they're about as helpless as your battleship. So your battleship can hit them, but they can't hit him either until they get web, which should be someone else's job because you should be out of web range or you have a problem. Also, anyone firing from relative and whom you think is well within his optimals will be affected by tracking disruption, especially battleship, larger ships which have very poor tracking in general. It does not take a huge for tracking disruption to be effective, even if unless your side ship are flying in a really straight line towards the enemy battleship or not moving at all. Even a little angular velocity will mean the enemy ship needs to track, and tracking disrupting him will have an effect. At this point, you will probably need to pile up your tracking disrupting modules on the target if you want them to have an effect, but they will have an effect. As I wrote, unlike the Caldera Ecm, which immediately means when you're targeted you can't do anything and it's very frustrating, and that's the reason people hate Blackbird so much, tracking disruption has no real apparent effect. All it does is you can still fire, but suddenly you just keep missing more often, you do less damage, you have more grazing shots, that sort of thing. In the heat of combat, people will tend not to notice as much, or at least they will keep firing until hopefully they get luckier. But if you pile up the tracking disruptors, they will really miss a lot. Now, as to the ways to defeat tracking disruption, and then we'll have our last part, which will be how to fly those tracking disrupting ships. Countering tracking disruption is not necessarily all that easy. The easiest way is just to have a missile or drone boat. If you have that, then you basically do not care about tracking disruption. If you're firing missiles and people tracking disrupt you, well, they're wasting their time. You can even call them noobs, but not right now because at least they're wasting their modules. If your primary means of damage is drones, your turrets may be tracking disrupted, but your drones will do full damage. Other ways to counter enemy tracking disruptors will be jamming them with friendly ECM. Your own tracking disruptors are powerless against enemy E-War because that's not turret damage, but jamming them will work. Specific modules that will help against tracking disruption will be tracking computers. Tracking computers are mid-slot modules, and they will improve both your range of the range of your weapons and their tracking speed. They work like tracking disruptors in that you can give them a script so that they will improve the tracking speed more, and the tracking and the optimal range not at all, or you can give them an optimal range, which case they will boost your optimal range and have very little effect on your tracking speed. The problem with and you also have forget about the module. There's another module, another low slot modules that gives you optimal range boost. Hold on a second. There it is. A tracking enhancer will also help. There's a Tech 1 version, obviously. The problem with these are they're less effective than a tracking disruptor. In other words, tracking disruptor is a very cheap ship, and it will to counter it, if you want to cancel the effect of the basic Tech 1 tracking disruptor 1, then you'll need more tracking computers and tracking enhancers, and these will take more slots and require definitely more skill points. So it's not really cost effective, but well, if you're targeted by tracking disruptors, you take all you can. Probably the best way to get to help with that problem is range control. It's not always an option, especially for battleships, but the best way is probably to get out of range. Napoleon Red asks, what does penalty mean? It means that when you have more than one module, the second module will not be as effective as the first one. Yes, thank you, Mir, here, who linked the stacking penalties. That's what it means. It works with all modules, including tracking disruptors, but it's still worth it to use more than one module. Usually, any additional module is worth it, but by the time you get to the fourth module, the additional gain is really minimal. So you need to have a really good reason to add more than 3 of the same modules, especially in combat. Do we have any questions so far before I get into how to fly your ship in combat? Okay, cool. So now I'm going to describe what you'll do as your brand new tracking disrupting frigate. Basically, this chapter is applicable to any sort of E-war ship. So all of you who are relatively new players or who have never done E-war, this could work on any race's frigate. The cruiser is just a larger version, but it shares the same characteristics. As you can see, my arbitrator from the fit I linked has a reasonably good tank, definitely much stronger than a frigate, but given that it's about as nimble as your average cupboard, it will take more fire before it can warp out of the way. So generally speaking, I don't want it to remain in harm's way. So you've got an E-war ship. The first thing you do is when people warp you into combat is you warp last, if you can. This means, unless your FC has specifically asked you all to warp at the same point, don't be afraid to control space, not to be taken the wing warp, or to warp individually at your optimals. You want to warp at about 50 kilometers, bit less if you don't have the skills, call it a little under your optimals. You do not, and I emphasize that, you do not want to land on grid, meaning the ships that you can see within the first wave. This means that the enemy fleet will see a bunch of ships arriving and they will log them. If you're within that first bunch of ships, you will be a very good candidate for primary target because you're an effective ship and you're a very fragile one. So if the primary use having more than one ship firing at you, you will die. What you want to do is wait a good 5 to 6 seconds until everyone else has warped and then land on grid, by which time everybody else in the enemy fleet should be busy hitting your main damage dealers, trying to get in refuel lodges, probably trying to kill your blackbirds if your side has them, and then it's time for you to land in, not be noticed too much, and start messing things around. You want to warp in at a decent range, which should be, depending on the optimal range of track instructors, which should be around 50, as I said. So you want to give it a bit of leeway, say 50 is nice and 30 is a bit close. Napoleon Red asks, while usually small ships have small capacitors, so energy management capacitor skills will be beneficial. Again, tracking disruption is not very capacitor intensive, much less so than micro-warp drives or lasers, for instance, which you should not be using when you're flying a TD ship. And if you're flying a MAR, you will usually have good capacitor and energy management skills anyway. So as I'm a MAR pilot, I never had any cap problems while flying TDs. And I don't think that non-MAR pilots should have these problems. I mean, other modules will burn your cap, will burn through your caps faster. Anyway, so there you go, landing at 30 kilometers if you are feeling bold, 50 if you're not, and you start targeting ships. Remember, you want to target enemy battleships in priority, not necessarily the enemy primary. You want the enemy primary target to keep firing and dealing damage. This will give it more reasons to stay on grid instead of trying to warp away. And if you're jumping across a gate, you really do not want to decloak until everyone else has. This means that if you are jumping into a system, into an enemy gate camp, you will not have range on your side. So you want to jump after everyone else, and you want to decloak after the enemy has a lot of other targets to get at. Now, once you land on grid at 50 or so, the first thing you do, and I do mean the first, is to align out. This means you select a celestial, say a gate, a planet, whatever you want, and hit A, or go to click align, or whatever you do to align. That's because your first duty is to stay alive. There is usually nothing will be accomplished by tracking disrupting for a couple more seconds. Sometimes it could happen, but that usually will be exceptional, like 90% of the time. So first you start aligning out, then you lock. Once you've aligned, you should always be remember you're aligning too. This will help when you warp out. Second thing you want to do, then you start locking people, and which should be fast because you will usually have a reasonably fast locking ship. And then your main focus will be on ships that are trying to get you. If you're yellow box, this means somebody is starting to lock you. You should usually consider warping away if it looks like a ship that could have an effect on you. If you're yellow box by a frigate, for instance, frigates have very low range, so you should not have a problem with that. You should not have a problem with that until the enemy frigate is getting too close for comfort. If you are yellow box by a big ship, don't take chances, get out. Napoleon Red asked, Kunur Quillin asked, so even in a frag, don't try to speed tank? No. The reason is your speed tank, what is called speed tank, means you're moving fast, and this means that you're moving across the enemy's line of sight, and you're building up angular velocity. This means the enemy ship's turrets need to move to pivot fast to be able to track you and keep you in their sights. Given that you're at 50 kilometers, even if you were micro warp driving, which I really do not recommend because it boosts your signature radius, makes you easier to hit. Given that you're at 50, whatever movement you make will not change your angle to the ship that's firing at you all that much, so speed is not going to help. What you are, it does not exist, but if you had to call it a category of tank, you are range tanking. Basically, you are out of range of most of the enemy's battle line. You're also, this does not exist either, you're also hate tanking, as I called it, meaning they will have many other targets that they would rather blab before they start focusing on you. And part of the range tanking means if somebody looks like he would be in a position to hurt you, you just warp out. Now, as you warp out, you should do two things. You should open your people and places box and hit on add place. Sorry, that's if you get into the people and places box and you have the places tab and you hit a few times on add location. This will create personal locations, and they're ready to be saved when you hit submit. So once you warp out, what you do is once you're about halfway through, click a first submit. You can call it, you can rename it later if you want, or you can rename it immediately if you type fast enough. This will create a mid save, which is not all that safe because it's aligned and people can see where you are, but it's a good place to get out of the way, at least to warp to before you bounce somewhere else. It will also mean that it will also be a good point to warp to. For instance, if you're in a fight and you're aligned to, say, a gate, but that gate is like 40 AUs away, you will need to warp all 40 AUs to the gate before warping back to the fight. If you've got a safe spot, a safe point that you have saved on the way using that add location function, then you will only have to warp like 8 AUs, which will be a shorter warp. You will save precious seconds during what you before you can get back on the field. The second part is, so you bounce to a location. The first time will be a celestial or a gate, a planet or a gate, and the second time is you will warp back to the battlefield. Once you get back, you want to wait until you have, say, 200 kilometers of the field, so very close to the end of your warp, and then you add another location which will be a good place to warp to, just to warp off range of anybody. So you will still be over 150 kilometers from where you were, so you can warp, but you can still warp out of range of any other person targeting you, well, hopefully, and still be on grid, so observe what's going on. You can also use that as a warp to point, because when you don't know exactly how the fight's going, you can warp to that point, which will be, say, 200 to 150 kilometers from the initial spot, then observe the battlefield, and then warp to one of your fleet members at a safe distance. So on the first time you warp back to the field, you will usually warp back on the same line unless somebody was warping towards you. If you find that people still target you, then you want to warp out, pick a different planet or a different gate, whatever, and come from that other celestial. If you can, use the map browser and on the solar system map so you can get from another direction. Remember to always plan your warp so as to arrive at a safe distance. That's really important. You really want to be alive. Just popping into the battlefield will give the enemy FC something to worry about. And even if you warp out before your tracking disruptors have completed their cycle, the enemy will still feel the effect until the cycle is over. That's really important. You only need to be in range at the beginning of the cycle. So now you're in battle, you're aligned and nobody's targeting you, which means you can start applying damage. This is when you start picking targets. Which targets do you want to pick on? The first, as I said, you want to target enemy battleships, you want to stay away from the primary, and how many targets you want to use your modules on will depend on the situation of your fleet. If you have several E-War ships in your fleet, you may want to create, if not an E-War squad, at least an E-War chat channel, like making sure who's doing what to whom. There's no point using tracking disruptors on the target that's already jammed, for instance. Ditto, if you have several tracking disrupting ships, there is no point. It's better to spread your tracking disruptions so that everybody gets a little instead of piling up on the single ship. I mean, if in my example you have that, or you take that Abaddon, that's an MR battleship that will be shooting from about 40 kilometers out, you give him one tracking disruptor or two, and he will only be able to shoot to about 20, so he's 20 kilometers out of range, and he's now having to either face the range penalties to his damage or have to get closer. There's no point going to like 4 or 6 tracking disruptors on him. You want to communicate with the others, and this could mean spreading your tracking disruptors if you really have a lot of TD ships in fleet. The same way you do tackle, meaning you pick a target that's close to whose name starts with the same letter as your own, and you work from there. Again, that's something you may want to discuss with your other E-War ships in a separate chat channel, and something you can settle while you move to the battle itself. As a new player, if you want to be opportunistic, I'd say that you may want to spread your tracking disruptors on different targets, so that everybody, at some point, you can have targeted every enemy target. This will allow you to be on a lot of kill mails, so it will make yourself look good. It will not necessarily be all that effective for the fleet, so you may want to do that after you're reasonably certain that the battle is won. It will have an effect. Other than that, if there's a really annoying enemy ship and you can hear that from the general chatter of the fleet, you can want to pile up all 3 tracking disruptors on him to make his life miserable, and it will. So basically, first, align out. Second, pick your targets, and once you've done that, you can, given that you've got good range, you can usually pick any target you want among the enemy, and make sure nobody is getting ready to be dangerous to you. If he does, get out. Don't wait for damage to land, because it will usually be too late. Definitely do not ever let anybody get within point range, which would be in your case like at least 30 kilometers, just in case they overheat their point. If the tackling frigate or an interceptor gets to say 35 kilometers, you are out of there and you're coming back to the battlefield from a different angle. So that's it for the lecture part of the class. Now, if there are any questions, we can answer them. And anybody who's currently in Aldrat, we can have a short practical. If you want, I've got I think 3 crucifiers that are already fitted. So if there are people who want to try crucifier and could fly one, just X up and I will contract them to you so you can try them out.